God puts a tyrant over us to see how we deal with that situation. And most of the time, if I'm honest with myself, how do I do? Not too good. But the first and most important rule in solving any problem that you have in your life is recognizing that it's a problem in the first place. Because if I can't submit to the guy who makes bad decisions, because I think he makes bad decisions, and I would make way better decisions, then how am I going to submit to God? Because anybody can throw judgment at God, can't they? Every single person does it. You know, they have that question, the problem of evil. You heard that one, the problem of evil? It's actually not a problem at all, because if you're establishing that there is evil in the world and God's not doing anything about it, then you've established that there's evil. So that means that the antithesis is true, and that would be that good is true. And who's the one responsible for that? It's a good question, because we always want to look at the bad side of the coin, and we always want to throw our judgment and project it out onto everything else. So Paul's going to continue that argument we're going to move to verse 8, and I'm going to read through that. And you can read ahead to 14, because that's exactly the direction that Paul's going. Okay? I encourage you guys, if you ever get curious, and I see you're looking down at your Bibles and you're just reading through it, I'm not the guy who has the authority here. It's God who has the authority. It's His authority. And if you don't like something that I have to say, or there's some criticism, I am open to it. Because that's what the guy from the sound booth is projecting things at me. Because I ultimately know that I am not the authority here. God has the authority. And it doesn't matter who's the president, I have no control over that. The only things I have control over are the things in my own life. The people, I don't even have control of the people that are around me. So before I get onto another rabbi trail here, I'm going to read through what Paul has to tell us about this submission to authority. He moves on to, he says, pay to all what is owed to them, taxes to whom taxes are owed, revenue to whom revenue is owed, respect to whom respect is owed, and honor to whom honor is owed. And then he moves on to this he's going to close the argument right here with what is really owed. Okay, so I'll just read through verse 8 to the next chapter. Owe no one anything except to love each other. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. Besides this, you know the time, that the hour has come for you to wake up from sleep. For salvation is nearer to us now than when we first believed. The night is far gone. The day is at hand. So let us cast off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. Let us walk properly, as in the daytime, not in orgies and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and sensuality, not in quarreling and jealousy, but put on the Lord, Jesus Christ, and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desire. Amen. Because that's how he ends our submission to authority. And there's some very interesting things to point out in the way that Paul is arguing here. Because he starts this out with honor, right? Now, in our society today, how much do we throw that word around? What's honorable, what's dishonorable? We don't. It's like we've completely discarded that word, you know? We haven't overused it. I would say it's one of the words we way underuse, just like glory and identity. Because we use identity to get whatever we want, right? You turn on the TV and there's some guy on there who says, well, you can't talk about something unless you are a minority community with this kind of X, Y, and Z attached to your name, right? Like you're not just Adam, you are white Protestant, what is that, the WASP thing? Yeah, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, yeah, something like that. Some identifier that they've got to attach to you. Or you're a Southern American something, something, something. The reason people try to attach that identity to every one of us, because it's easier for them to figure us out, because you don't have to actually talk to anybody if you're like, oh, well, what is it that you identify as? And the moment you've thrown up an identity and put a box around yourself, then guess what? You're nothing more than just another box. And once you dehumanize enough people in society, guess what? There's no humans left. And you've ultimately fulfilled the purpose that you wanted and became your own God. You guys tracking with that? Because that's what our society is doing. With the lack of honor, because every one of you sitting in this room, guess who made you? God did. Guess who made all those people that you think are your enemies? God did. Guess whose fault all that is? God did. I am a leader at work, and I tell everyone at work all the time, I get my leadership style from Jesus because he's the greatest leader I know. So I'm going to mimic. I'm going to try to do the things that he does to the best of my ability. And it's difficult because Jesus led. How did he lead? Sacrificially. He gave everything he had, every chance that he could, all the time. And that's the greatest leader that I know of. Now, the interesting thing about Jesus is that he would have these conversations, these really long conversations with individuals to get them to understand something, right? He's the God of the universe, standing there right in front of you as a human being, and he's willing to take the time, as important as everything is, for the individual. And really think about that. Because in the context of every parable that Jesus ever tells, it's a conversation that he has with another person. It's not a golden tablet that falls from the sky. And there's not halos and everything around him. Our God is as human as we are. Even more so, because he's willing to give everything that he has. And I always say the first rule of leadership is that everything is your fault. And the second rule of leadership is refer to the first rule of leadership. Because if you're not willing to take on the responsibility for the people that you care about, then you're not worthy to lead them in the first place. That's what's honorable. That's how Jesus acted toward his people. That's how he acts toward us. He's willing to take on, ultimately, the responsibility of every failure that every person has ever committed in the existence of mankind and pay the ultimate price. Why? Because he loved us. Well, getting back to Paul's argument here, owe no one anything except to what? Love. And here is the Greek word, agapo, right? Agapo. It is the act of sacrificial love. So when your enemy walks up to you, I know it's really easy, right? To just throw mud in their face. But what's the right thing to do? Love. Because that's the terms that he uses here are so loaded. Because what does he say? He says taxes, pay taxes where taxes are due, right? Everybody knows that. You should pay your taxes, guys. Right? That April 15th comes around. You feel really good about paying those taxes. You know, I used to work 1099, and I used to get all my money, and I wouldn't save any of it. I was not a very wise young man. And then at the end of the year, the federal government would send me a bill. You know how awesome that is. I don't know if any of you guys have ever had to do that. That's like one of those, all of a sudden, that submission to authority thing gets tested real quick, especially when it hits you where you think you are in complete control of your life, especially if you think you're in complete control of your money. The moment the government says, well, you know, really, that's not all yours. I got to take that from you. And then you start griping about how people these people, they do nothing for a living, and I got to pay all these taxes for these people. And then it's like, who printed the money in the first place? Remember? Somebody said that. I can't remember who, but he's an influential character in this story that we're living. Because we do owe. We owe something. And there it is right there. If you look, it jumps right out of the page at you. Owe no one anything except to love each other. Because that's what we're in debt to. Because he loved me. When people ask you why you do those crazy things that you do, why? Because he loved me first. He knew me before I knew me. He came after me before I even realized that I was sinking. So, here he goes. Except to love each other. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. Remember when Jesus says, he says this strange thing. He says, don't think that I came to abolish the law. I came to fulfill it. You ever wonder what he meant when he said that? Because there it is. Paul's just told us. He just gave us the secret, right? The open secret of what it is to fulfill the law. It is to love. And people will say, well, what about this? Or what about that? These Old Testament rules that there were. If somebody sold their daughter into slavery and this and that. When you actually look at it and you look at the law, if a person in a poor household, like super poor, they don't have anything to their name, they could sell their daughter to a wealthy household to work in that household. And if the oldest son of the household found her pleasing, he would marry her. If not, they had to pay back the family all kinds of money. But you know what that did? In retrospect, it was the biggest wealth equalizer in the ancient world. Because if you sold your daughter into slavery, all of a sudden, guess what? All of her offspring and your offspring have now gotten an education. They've become wealthy. It was the great equalizer. God took slavery, the institution of slavery, that was rampant all over the world, and turned it into the thing that equalized men and women and poor and rich. Now, how awesome of a God is that? He can take the worst institution man can think of and turn it into the greatest equalizer that there ever was. And when you really think about that rule and what it did, it brought more people up out of poverty than any other rule. Because I'll tell you right now, the ancient Hebrews, as small as their kingdom was in comparison to the other kingdoms, they were wealthy. Because they were willing. Because they somewhat followed the rules. Because love is the ultimate fulfillment of that law. Why would you take on a girl who has nothing? Selfish maybe at first. But ultimately she lives in your house. She helps you. She takes care of you. And then guess what? Love trumps everything. Think of the story of Ruth. Right? Move out of Judges and then into Ruth. We've done that here, haven't we? What's that? You think Ruth had anything? Or Naomi? Had nothing. Who was Boaz? Is that some evil patriarchy that, like in our modern day, that they're preaching against all the time? It was love. It's a love story, just like our story. Because what is the debt that we have to our God? Is that we love our God with all our heart, soul, and strength, everything that we got. But everyone forgets the second part, to love your neighbor as yourself. Because it's easy to love somebody that you think you're disconnected from, isn't it? It's easy to act and do the show and put on the hypocrisy of non-genuineness that Paul's already talked about. It's easy to do that. It's easy to walk around and carry a big old cross around your neck and, get up there and yell and scream at people about how they're living their lives wrong. But it's actually really hard to actually love other people. So he says, this is the fulfillment of the law. If you loved somebody, would you commit adultery? If you loved somebody, would you murder? This is the difference between having lines in the road and not having lines in the road. Okay? I know my voice, I'm struggling with my voice, guys. You'll just have to forgive me on that one. Do you guys love me still? I'm trying to push through. I'm trying to push through. Because if love is not the primary motivation for the things that you do, then you are really being selfish in the things that you do. If you really think about what you're pursuing in life or the goals and aspirations that you have, and they're not for the best benefit of everyone around you, then you've missed the point completely. And you've made yourself God of your own little tiny universe. And I know I like to use driving metaphors. And I think it's good because everybody in America, we all drive, right? I hope we do somehow. You got here somehow, and I hope it wasn't like teleportation or something like that. But when you're driving down the road, there's these little lines, right? And I've used this metaphor before. But there's these guidelines that you're not supposed to cross, okay? People cross them all the time, I know. I throw my hand up, and I'm like, what are you doing? You know, you're driving a 5,000-pound weapon right at me. Anyway, there's these guidelines that you have in the road. And if you cross those things, guess what? The potential for you to die is right there on the other side of this thin little line that we disregard. I mean, how much time do you actually spend looking at that line and thinking about the potential consequence of you crossing that line? Really, when you're driving. Do that exercise sometime. Just say, well, you know, how much time did I actually spend looking at the line? You get home today, you'll be shocked. You'll be shocked at how little time you spent looking at that line. You know why? Because you've been doing it for so long that your body has developed muscle memory to that. You can see the line without looking at the line. But when you consciously try to act and look at the line, guess what you start doing? You start swerving over the line. It's just like traffic. If you're on the interstate and you're like, oh man, that's a big truck, guess what you feel yourself start doing? You start swaying, moving toward the truck, right? The rules in life are a lot the same way. If we focus on trying not to steal, guess what? You start swerving toward the line. If we focus on not committing adultery, guess what we do? Start veering toward the line. But if we focus on staying right on the road, then guess what? You don't even have to worry about the lines in the road because it comes naturally. It's automatic. If it's you trying to be, and it's funny because we live in America, so we all drive on the right side of the road. And this book is about what? What's this book completely about? Righteousness, right? What's a repeating theme over and over again? Living the right way, living righteous, and here we are in America driving on the right side of the road. So if you wonder why I use driving metaphors, there's a lot that lines up. So when I was younger, I would focus on not this one, I'm not supposed to do this one, I'm not supposed to do that one, I'm not supposed to do that one, okay? As I get older and I get wiser, but it's not about not doing, it's about what I am doing. There's a transition. There was a transition for me about 2 years ago where something clicked. Something clicked in my head. It was like, Adam, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do that, right? Conscience, my conscience, Holy Spirit was like, stay away, stay away, stay away. And then one day it was like, here's what you should do. Here's the right direction. I'm no longer looking at the lines in the road. I'm driving the right way. Why? Because love is the primary motivator for what I do. And it was interesting because I was listening to one of those, they have this Focus on the Family. I don't know if you guys ever listen to Focus on the Family. And I can't remember the author, but they wrote a book about raising children, and I read some of the book. If I'm honest, I didn't read the whole thing. I listened to mainly the podcast, and I bought the book, and it sits on my shelf collecting dust, right? I have too much spare time, okay? So the book is about how you raise your children, how you discipline your children. And the number one rule in the book, it was laid out in rules, was that you never discipline your children out of anger. You discipline them out of love. Because like, if I discipline my children out of anger, I teach them how to be angry. That's all I do. I teach them how to be angry and react in a selfish way. We wonder why so many kids are running around in the grocery store saying, I want that piece of candy, I want that piece of candy, I want that piece of candy. And the parents are just smacking them. You can't have that. You're embarrassing me in front of all these people. Is that the right way to discipline your child? No. Why? Because you discipline them because it makes you, in that moment, it makes you feel like they're ashamed to you. They are shaming you in public. Now, who do you care about more? The people's perception of your identity, or the little person that you're trying to teach to be a right person? You know, I look back, I've made that mistake several times. Kids are full of energy, right? And when we work 40, 50, 60-hour weeks, right? Guess what we don't have? Energy. Those little kids have the expectation, Dad, why are you so tired all the time? Dad, what? Come on, let's go play. And you just like, I don't have any gas in the tank, you know? And your immediate response to that is to be frustrated and to be angry. It's easy to do, I know it. I'm dad, I got 3 teenagers. It's super easy. But the right thing to do and the easy thing to do are often so far apart that the chasm in between is unbridgeable, okay? So when Paul talks about these rules, and he says this, and any other commandment, right? What he's saying to us, this is what I feel, what he's saying to us is that these rules, it's not that the rules are arbitrary. It's not that they're there for no reason. The rules are there. But if you can focus on this, right? If you can focus on the destination and why you're going there, then the lines don't matter. The lines are for the person who has to watch their feet as they walk. The brand new person. I have teenagers who are just driving on the road. You know how much they watch the lines? Religiously. Religiously. You know why? Because they don't know how to drive. Us as adults, guess what we should know how to do? We should know how to drive. We should know the destination. We should be walking with him, and he should know us. Because ultimately, Jesus is the destination. And if that's not our fixed point, our focused point of reference, I don't know where you're going. Yeah, well, clearly. Or you're in reverse. And you wonder why you keep hitting people, right? You wonder why you keep backing up, why you're not making any forward progress. It's because what you aim at is what you will hit. That's one thing I know. If you never aim at anything in life, guess what? You're going to hit. Mom's basement. The couch in mom's basement. That's what you're going to hit. Congratulations. 40-year-old basement dwelling, trolling Facebook person, Twitter handle, something, right? Because if you never aim at anything, you're never going to achieve anything. So Paul straight up says, these rules, well, they're the lines in the road. And here's the truth. Love your neighbor as yourself. And guess what? You'll never wander into their lane. If you care about that person who's driving on the other side of the road, guess what you won't do? You won't wander in their lane. You won't have to worry about how they're driving. And you won't have to get upset. And you may actually reach the destination that you're trying to get to. Does that make sense? Guys good? Okay. We'll move on. It's just 2 verses. So he says, love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. There it is. Plain and simple. Right, guys? Y'all got it? Good to go? We're all sanctified, ready to go. Right? No. Because life is a journey, isn't it? It's a race. Life is a journey. Every metaphor you've seen, it's a journey. And I will guarantee you that the guy who's telling you about this does not have this all figured out. Because there's things in the road up ahead that I don't know. Like James says, hey, guys, don't say you're going to be at this place tomorrow, because you have no idea. Remember, who's in charge? And what is it? Man makes plans and God laughs, doesn't he? Because we think we got it all figured out as we're driving in our little car, right? Did you guys try that little experiment where you're driving in your car and you realize that you think that you're in control of every single little thing, and then it's like you're actually not? It's like one of those amazing, I don't know. It was amazing for me when I did that experiment. And I'm like, wow, I'm actually not in control of anything right now as I sit behind this glass. For some reason, I don't know if it's psychological. Human beings, we think that we're in control the moment we're behind glass, right? We think that we're in control. Like the moment you watch people walking around at the mall or something, and you see these teenagers or adults even, they've got their phone up in front of their face. They're agitated, they're overstimulated, because we as adults, the same thing happens to us. We get overstimulated, and they're frantically going through their phone. You know why? Because at that moment, they're trying to gain some kind of control over their life that they have lost. It's psychological. Like putting yourself in a fishbowl, right? You think you're in control of the fishbowl, but guess what? The fishbowl is actually in control of you. The very prison that you've put yourself in, right? True freedom exists in the ability to recognize that I am not in control of tomorrow, that is in God's hands and His authority. So here we go. So if I'm wrong, then what Paul has to say next won't line up, okay? If it's not about the lines, if it's about the lines in the road, then what I have to say won't line up. What I said won't line up with what Paul has to say in verse 11 here, because he says, besides this, you know the time and the hour has come for you to wake from sleep. Now, yeah, I'm just a full pause right there because I like to, right? Okay, when you're driving in your car, and I know I told you guys to do that homework with the metaphor, how awake do you feel? How awake do you really feel? You're like they've done studies on this, and I'm a big geek, okay? So I'm going to try not to turn this into a Science Sunday. But I'm strange, okay? It's all right. You guys love me, right? Because I look up weird facts, and they just stick in my head like glue. But when you drive your car, your brain actually goes into the same wavelength of sleep. Did you know that? Your hypnotic trance. Did you know why radio is the best avenue to advertise? Because you are at your most suggestive point when you're driving your car. Because your body, the carnal person, the flesh, is the one that's in control. Your brain shuts off. It's like, okay, it's time to go to sleep. Have you ever been driving? Here's an example. And I know this happens to everybody. It happens to me all the time. You've been driving to work or somewhere you've been 1,000 times, and you're like, I can't even remember how I got here. You know why? Because you were asleep. Because we have a whole world of people who are asleep at the wheel in their own lives. They know the destination. They know that there's lines in the road, but the light turns red, and guess what? They're asleep. The rules change, they're asleep. All of a sudden, okay. You know how more likely you are to die in a car accident than any other thing to happen to you? Lightning, lottery, COVID, anything, any of those things? Here's a story I'll just throw out there. Food for thought, okay? First two cars that were ever manufactured in the United States, Chicago, Illinois. It was in I can't remember the year. The point of the story sticks in there. It's pointy, it's sharp. First two cars One of them was an industrial oil baron. He bought one. He's like, wow, horseless carriage. They didn't call them cars back then. And another one was a wealthy landowner on Chicago's south side. One of them lived on the north side of Chicago, and the other lived on the south side of Chicago. Now, I don't know if anyone's ever been to Chicago. It is a big place, very big place. There's a lot of distance between north and south, okay? Guess what the two guys did? Yep. First thing they did was have an accident, okay? Operator error, right? If that's not funny, I don't know what is, because that's what we do as human beings, okay? Because we think we got something new and shiny. We get in it. We get used to it. We adapt to it. And then guess what? We let our body take over. And then we don't care about anybody else because it's our universe. And then here comes the wreck, right? What is it? Said something, peace and security, and then comes the, yes. Because that's what we do. We fall asleep at the wheel. We forget the destination we're going to. And we don't see any of the lines in the road. And we've completely lost ourselves in a state of sleep, don't we? We just kind of get comfortable, right? You ever do that? I do that on the couch. I get comfortable. The TV's on. I'm not watching the TV. Not at all. I don't even know what's happening on the TV. My wife's talking to me. My kids are talking to me. Guess where I'm at? I'm not there. I'm asleep. It happens, doesn't it? Because we're not paying attention. Because we forgot what was actually important in our lives in the first place. So it's time to wake up. Because the people around you, guess what? They need you. I realized that. Doesn't matter if you're a guy, because, I mean, ladies, come on. It happens to you too, right? I'm trying to find more ladies in the room than just you two. But okay, but it happens to you too. Because our lives have become so busy that we forget what's important. And we fall asleep, just like driving from one place to another that we've done 100 times, and we've done this religious, repetitious thing, and then guess what? We forget the goal that we're aiming at in the first place, right? Right? It's the goal. It's the sacrificial love that he was willing to show us. Because that's the debt we have to pay. That's the debt. He paid for our mistakes. So what do we owe him? Everything. And what is it that I'm made of? And everything that I am. And if I love my God with all my heart, soul, and strength, and everything that I am, my miod, then am I capable of loving my neighbor as myself? Because one is a reflection of the other. If I can love my neighbor, that shows me how much I can love my God. Amen? Okay, so the time is, it's time to wake up. Salvation is what? It's nearer now than when we first believed. That always reminds me of Jeremiah. Jeremiah, the poet, or prophet, however you want to address him. Or he's Jeremiah. Jeremiah wrote a lot of stuff down. He's got a whole book in here, if you guys are curious. Paul quotes it a lot. And Isaiah and Ezekiel. Yeah. But Jeremiah, he has this beautiful phrase. He says, I move closer to my God with every beat of my heart. Because he realizes something. That you have to be awake. You have to recognize the things that are happening around you in order to move closer to God. You can't fall asleep and move forward. You can't lose sight of the one that you're moving forward toward. I think we've forgotten that. I could be wrong. But I think as a church, we've not moved closer to who Jesus is. We've spent so much time trying to focus on numbers and this and that and things that don't matter that we've forgotten our first love. We've forgotten him and we don't pursue him. We pursue everything but him. Look at how evil this guy is. Look at how evil that guy is. Projecting judgment everywhere we can. And the whole time, who have we forgotten? Who have we trampled, just like everyone else is currently trampling? as we trample over God, to tell those people how they trampled over God. We've forgotten our God. We've fallen asleep. It's time to wake up, because our God is, in the words of John, love. And if we forget that, well, then we've just made ourselves our own gods. And I don't know how you guys are doing sitting in your cars as you're your own God of your own little universe, trying not to cross the little lines of your life. How's that working out? I didn't want to preach too much, but the Holy Spirit brought it out of me. So he says, the night is far from gone. The day is at hand. That's good news, guys. It's good news. The night's gone. It's good news. It's good news for God. It's bad news for us, because there's things that you can hide in the night, isn't there? But when the day comes, where's there to hide? When the light, not even your shadow has a place to hide in the light. So he says, the night is gone, the day is at hand, so let us cast off the works of darkness. And here he goes. He's going to give us the list. But remember, the list is not to check off boxes in our lives. The list is to remind us of where the lines are and where we shouldn't cross. And if we've crossed over those lines, it's time to remember something, that God loved us before we could even love ourselves. So he says, the night is far gone, the day is at hand, so let us cast off the works of darkness and put on the armor of what? Of light. Because who are we supposed to be? Whose name do we carry into the world? And if we carry that name, what is that supposed to be? That's supposed to be the light. Jesus is the light of the world. And he's given that responsibility to us. And for some reason, I don't know why, we get on Facebook and we get on Twitter and we get on all these places and we just talk about how evil everything is and how terrible everything is. Is that shedding light on things, or is that casting darkness? Is that the armor of light, or is that the shadow? Who are we? If we're children of the Most High, then what light should we be shining? The one that casts away the shadows, not the one that makes them longer. You guys got me? You follow? You track? Because if we're casting the right light, I know John does this a lot. The metaphors of light and darkness. Back when people used to actually look at their shadows. I don't know when the last time you looked at your shadow was. Right, my shadow, he's right there all the time. Anyway, shadow's there all the time. But the thing that's really interesting, you know when your shadow's the smallest? You know when it's the smallest? When the light is right over top of you. When that's your aim. When you aim in life, when your aim is above you, just like Paul said about authority, when your aim is above you and you realize that he's above you, how small is your shadow? You know, in Revelation, it talks about how your shadow won't even exist. You won't even cast a shadow. That's really interesting, because the only thing that doesn't cast a shadow is someone who's completely transparent. If I'm completely transparent, there's a lot of stuff I have to work on. You know what? Me and God have a lot of work to do. You know what? I trust him, and he's willing to do the work. Just like the leper, Jesus walks down from the mount. He says, if you're willing, can you make me clean? Every person that walked up to Jesus and said, hey, Jesus, we know that you're awesome. We know that you're awesome. So how does it that we join your club? You know, Jesus responded with confusion and misdirection. Like Nicodemus. Nicodemus is like, hey, Jesus, we know you're awesome. Right? We know you come from God. We know you do all this cool stuff. And then what? Jesus is like, oh, I know where you're going with this. You're wrong. Because if God's right, then all of us are wrong. So who is it who's dragging us down the road in the direction that we need to be going in. Right? Like we think that we're all driving the car, don't we? We think that we're the ones walking the journey. This is my ship. I put the sails up. I steer the rudder. I do all those things. And it's like, what direction are you actually traveling in? We've got a whole world full of people that have no idea what direction they're traveling in. Someone gives them the subtlest hint of a wind, right? And usually it's a hot wind. Subtlest hint of a wind, of this is what you could be, this is your identity, this is what will make you special. And guess what? We got these kids now who think that by a boy wearing girls' clothes or a girl wearing boys' clothes, that that's what makes them special. You know whose failure that is? You guys remember the first rule of leadership? It's our fault. Why is it our fault? Because our kids are special already. Who made them that way? You know how complex the human eye is? Like, could you imagine, like you created this beautiful work of art. You were the one who designed the first Corvette. You were the one who designed the first Corvette. And a guy walks up and he says, you know what would be way better? If we flattened all the tires on it. Because then it's got metal wheels. How would you feel about the guy who designed the Corvette? Yeah, well, because that's what people are doing. That's what they're doing. They're confusing these kids with their telling them that you're supposed to be this, you're supposed to be that. This is who you're supposed to be. Your identity is supposed to be found in this and that. It's like outside of God, the only identity we have is hell. Because if we're left to our own devices, guess what? That's hell. Just go lock yourself in a closet for 12 hours and find out. First thing that happens is you attack yourself. And here we are talking about how, oh, those kids. Yeah. All right. Was anyone else in this room confused when they were a kid about who they were and searched most of their teenage years for their own identity? You looked in all different kinds of places, didn't you? You may have gone to the military. You may have gone to this place or that place. You may have got the new boyfriend because he's got the cool comb in his back pocket or whatever it was that you tried to establish your identity as a human being and establish your own autonomy. But what you actually did was give your identity over because God gave you an identity. You're beautifully and wonderfully made. Every single human being. Give honor where honor is due. So here's salvation. If we're the light, then what light are we shedding? Are we saying, oh, here's a conversation. And I love my Baptist brothers and sisters, right? I love them. I love them. I love them. Say it 3 times. But the conversation is always this: if you don't change, you're going to hell. Right? And that's a powerful message. It's a great message. John the Baptist style message. But how about this? If you don't realize who you actually are and your identity in God, you're going to hell. The most selfish hell that you can imagine. How much more scary is that? How much more would that wake someone up from the reality that they've created for themselves in this modern psychosis that we've produced? Because, I mean, who is it that you really are? I mean, you ask that question enough. Are you going to find the answer? Because the guy who made the Corvette, who named it? Can the Corvette tell it? I'm going back to Paul's, can the potter say to the pot? Or can the pot say to the potter? Because the Corvette, can the Corvette be like, oh, you know what? I'm going to be a Chevy Nova today. No, it can't. The guy who designed the Corvette also designed the Chevy Nova, if you guys didn't know that. He designed them for specific tasks, individually suited for those vehicles. Just like the hammer and the wrench. A hammer is not a wrench, and a wrench is not a hammer. If you've ever tried to drive a nail with a wrench before, it does not work too good. Or if you've tried to unscrew a bolt with a hammer, guess what? It does not work very well. Does that mean the hammer's worth more than the wrench? No. Does it mean the Corvette is worth more than the Nova? Well, yeah. Okay. Anyway, good. I'm good. It's the value we put on it. Those are just objects, though. You see what I'm getting at? Laugh track is fun. Excuse me. So he says, the hour has come for us to wake up. Let's put on the armor of light. Because what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to show people who they are and who they can be. If you guys remember grace, right? Paul talks about grace a lot too. We just did that in the last chapter. The gifts of grace, right? Because God saw potential in us. What did he call us out from? The hell that we had created. Our own personal, autonomous hell. That's what he called us out of. Thank God. Amen? Thank God he called us out of our own hell. Because I couldn't imagine what kind of person I would be. I wouldn't be up here, that's for sure. I know that. I know I'm moving in a direction. I know I have an identity that no one can take away from me. No one. They can take my life. They can take every possession that I own, but they cannot take my God. They can't do it. Good luck. Try. So he says, let's cast off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. Okay, I'm just building up for this, okay? Let us walk properly as in the daytime, not in orgies and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and sensuality, not in quarreling and jealousy. Now, I'm running out of time here, guys, so I'm going to cut into the fellowship a little bit. I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to look at the pictures. Be all right. Now think about this. When you're walking at night, right? I do this a lot with the goats, and I just got a flashlight recently because they make noises and they're new to me, so I got to go check, right? And I just recently bought a flashlight. Have you guys ever tried to walk outside when it's pitch black? No, I do have another story. It's a longer story about me walking from the courthouse to where my house is through the golf course. It's a really funny story. Ask me about it sometime, I'll tell you. But when you try to walk outside at night, there's something that happens that you can't do in the daytime. And stay on your feet, right? You get knocked down it's like, what's that? Oh man, it's like all of a sudden, a tennis ball, a little green neon tennis ball becomes the biggest obstacle in your life to getting to the right place, the right time. Okay? Now, Paul uses this metaphor. It's a beautiful metaphor because I'm just going to expand on it a little bit. How much more can I add to Paul's words, right? So as I'm walking out toward the goats, there's a tennis ball in the backyard that my dog has somehow, just placed right in the path that I've beaten over and over again from walking back and forth to where my goats are. I have a little path where I've pushed everything down, You walk in the same spot long enough and everything underneath it, you know where the path is and you think you're all right. Well, until the dog comes along and drops a tennis ball. And all of a sudden, that little insignificant thing becomes the biggest obstacle in your life to getting to the place that you need to go. Because what are you aiming at in the first place? And where are you walking? You can't see because you're in the darkness. Now, multiply that by how many do we have? 6.5 billion? I'm not sure. The guy in the sound booth knows the exact number of people that live on the planet. I'm sure there's another one that just popped up. But yeah, it's hard for me to keep count. I mean, I had the abacus in my pocket, but 2 new editions this morning, right? Dad's back there keeping world population count. But anyway, we stumble on another tennis ball here. The point is that when you're walking without the direction of God, you are walking in darkness. When you think that you're walking on your own 2 feet, guess what? There's a tennis ball right there in front of you. It doesn't matter what you're aiming at if you're trying to walk in the middle of the night, because there's some dog somewhere that's going to drop a tennis ball or this red spiky ball You guys ever stepped on a red spiky ball? It's like hard plastic, no shoes on. It's all of a sudden you don't want to check on the goats, you just want to check on your foot, okay? It just changes the whole dynamic of the destination, everything. Yeah, Legos. Oh yeah, definitely in the darkness. Yeah, as a father of 3 children, I mean, I've had my fair share of those sharp, why do they have to make the corners so sharp on Legos? You know, they rounded off the parts where they go together, but it's like, I just helped you put together this bridge, and you left it right in the middle of the floor. Don't you know that I'm going to be walking here? Now, that is a metaphor in and of itself, because you shouldn't be walking around in the darkness in the first place. Whose fault is it that I tripped on the Legos or the tennis ball or any of that stuff? My fault. Exactly. And this is what Paul's saying. He's saying, here's the list of things that you're doing when you're walking around in darkness. This drunkenness stuff, these orgies, which that was a problem back in Rome, okay? Because guess what? They worshiped these gods that had this stuff going on all the time. It's not much different than today. I mean, this happens. There's crazy stuff, okay? I'm not going to get too deep into that. It's terrible. And so drunkenness, orgies, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, right? Like, no, I would never do anything like that, right? Like, yeah, I've checked off those boxes. I don't walk around drunk all the time. I'm not going to these big pagan events, right? I'm not doing that. Well, hold on, because he says, he moves on, doesn't he? He says, not in sexual immorality. It's a little closer. Yeah, I don't do that. Oh, what about sensuality? You guys know what that means? That idea is like taking and wearing clothes that are going to purposely draw someone's eye and get them to desire you. We walking in that because guess what? You're going to trip on a tennis ball. Guess what else? Well, he's going to get real close to home. Quarreling and jealousy. None of us do that, do we? Checked off those boxes. We never do that, do we? You never get upset because the president made some kind of silly rule and start quarreling, do you? Your neighbor, he supports this thing. You're not going to go over there and purposely start an argument with the guy, are you? Because you disagree with him? That's quarreling. We don't do that ever, do we? Well, in Paul's book, guess what? All those things are walking in darkness. Because sometimes, even under the best intentions, when we go and try to correct someone else's point of view, guess who's walking in the dark? Both of us. Because what's the aim that you're aiming at? You're aiming at correcting that person's view. And then you'll try to justify it, right? Because we don't ever do that. We don't ever try to justify our actions. And we say, well, it's because I care about him. I don't want him to see things the wrong way. Anyone ever said that before? You heard that excuse? You know what it is? It's an excuse. Because you know what you care about? You care about whatever that thought is in your head or whatever that argument is that you have. That's what you care about. You don't actually love your neighbor if you're going and telling him that he's mowing his yard wrong. Because what does it matter? What does it matter how he mows his yard? He's mowing it north-south. He shouldn't be mowing it east-west. Come on, that's the way the sun comes up. You can't be smart and do that, can you? Well, Jesus said, you got a problem. Because anyone who calls their brother a fool is in danger of what? Hellfire. Right? Now you would think that after this, Paul would go into some huge argument about how you shouldn't judge. How you shouldn't judge your brothers and sisters. Because they're your brothers and sisters. And if you love them, why would you do that? Because there's certain things that don't matter. But there's one thing that matters more than any other. And a lot of times, we think that we're walking in the light as we go and check on goats that are just fine because we care about them. We care about the goats. But we go out there because we're afraid, well, maybe somebody's taking my goats or something selfish that I'm thinking on the inside. Or maybe I'm trying to escape from the argument that's in the house or whatever it is. It's all a selfish motivation. Anytime I move forward in life with a selfish motivation, I'm walking in darkness. I would not quarrel with somebody unless I loved them. And ultimately, the idea of quarreling with someone that you love is not quarreling. It's correction. Because sometimes you have to come out and you have to say, you know what? I love you, and the direction you're going right now is going to kill you. And I'm willing to put our relationship on the line because I care about you that much. I cannot watch you destroy yourself. I can't do that. You have too much potential. I care about you too much. That's what we do with our children, isn't it? We look at them and we say, if you really love your children, you look at them and you say, what you're doing right now is going to destroy you. If you do not change, your life is going to be over as we know it. Why do you say that? Because you love them. Because you want them to be better. Because you know that they're capable of doing so much more than what they're currently doing. You know what kind of person they can be. And you know what kind of person they should be. And that's what we all aim at, isn't it? That's who we all aim at. Because if we miss that point, we've missed everything completely. See, I don't wish my children to be doctors or lawyers or surgeons or politicians. I don't wish that at all. I wish them to be just like him. Why? Because that's the greatest man that ever lived. It's the greatest God I ever had. He's the best friend I've ever known. The one who could love me when I couldn't love myself. He is the greatest ever. And I don't need halos and rainbows to prove it, because I've got me. And I know what he rescued me from. Amen? And I didn't want that to be really heavy, guys, but it is super important that we understand it. Because we've got a whole world of people who have completely lost direction. They've walked in darkness for so long. Their anger at the tennis balls in life. They don't even know. They don't even know that life could be different. They don't even know that their identity, they could be so much more. And us caring about them is what's going to change them. Because it's God's love toward me that changed me. It's the prayers of a mother and a father and a grandmother. Probably a great-grandmother in there. God rest her soul. Probably a lot of prayers from them. Caring, loving prayers that got me up here today so that I could show you how much I care about you guys. Amen? So I'll end with a word of prayer. I went over a little bit. I apologize for that.